All right, guys. So when I first came into the space, the main problem that I was trying to solve was how to get somebody from just a basic knowledge of firearms and firearm safety to where they're able to fight and shoot at the same time, or integrate the skills. Because generally the way the approach was, everything was very compartmentalized. Everybody was just trying to do one thing at a time, put everything in their little box. So it wasn't a thing. And now I worked with several people on this. Mainly it was Craig Douglas, Dick Delgadillo, who really helped me with this model. And this is the linear progression model as far as in-fight weapon access. So we talk about going from the fence position, which does a lot as far as making sure that we have oversight of the situation. Now then we have low ready, we have our cover as far as like defending the sucker punches and dealing with those shots, arm fending, clinch, and so on. Now guys, there's a lot covered here, and I don't want to now, before we kind of get deeper into it and start making more content as far as how this all goes and how to do each one of these skills, I want to show you guys a clip that I did with with a podcast with CCX2, is USA Carry. We talked about this exact model and what skills are covered in what course and how you guys can learn these skills and what courses you need to take for the things you're missing as far as your readiness. All right, guys, hope you enjoy. Check it out.
And John, real quick, how many different courses do you provide?
I have 4 different courses. It's 5 if you want to count knife combatives, but knife and pistol combatives are essentially the same class. Those are all 1 day, 8-hour courses, except for integrated combatives, which is typically reserved for people who have some kind of firearms training. They have safe firearm handling skills, and that's where I'll cover the entire dynamic of what I call the in-fight weapon access, the core concepts, as far as the difficulty, as far as making sure you have access to a weapon, or what's less difficult and more difficult depending on proximity, right?
Do you want to go through that chart you were showing us before?
Yeah.
To kind of explain the different courses you offer. And that was kind of, I was like, we were leading up. We need to go live, but we should do this again.
Sure.
So let's.
Because you were getting into it before we were live. I was like, oh man, this is great content for the show.
Yeah. So it's all interrelated. It's not non-sequential, multi-directional, right? I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence at home, but it's just showing how all these things are interconnected, how you can easily go from a fence position, which is a hands up defensive position, going straight into where someone rushes you and now you're pinned. And pinned can mean where you're pinned up against a wall, or you're pinned on the ground. Perhaps you're in a carjacking, they're trying to get into a car with you. You're in a confined space of some sort. Okay, so it's a low ready. Okay, this is kind of where I think people are going to kind of get at me, because I've heard low ready being referred to as a no ready. So the reason why I use a no ready as opposed to a compressed 3 or a high ready or something of that nature, it's a relative position. The main concept is that you are not incurring some type of aggravated assault charge. There was a gentleman in Portland who was basically being confronted by Antifa, and he went to a compressed 3, scanned left and right, and then he got 5 counts of aggravated assault. So I don't want that to happen to my clients. So I focus on a low ready, and an active low ready, not this kind of relaxed ready where people are holding their pistol down to the ground, but an active low ready to where they're able to go up into a center mass shot relatively quickly. Cover, when I'm talking about cover, I mean like a default cover position. This is for defending incoming strikes, a sucker punch of some kind, and then that moves further. So the other thing we're talking about is how, if this is a fundamental skill, it would be great if I can have people for 2 days and do some integrated combatives and all that. But if the main thing they really need to learn is defense, they really need to learn as far as like making it hard for people, making sure they manage distance. Those are the more fundamental concepts. Okay. And if they know how to do those things, then I can kind of take them to a point where I can't turn anybody into a badass in like 2 days, but I can at least show them what they need to do to where they can become a badass eventually. Right. So so moving on. So the other thing is that the fence managed distance. Okay. So as we lose distance, what we end up losing is reaction time. So, and also it's becoming we get in a position where this person's assaulting us. We're in a confined space. We're pinned. We've got the dynamic of being on the ground or being there's other people around. So we have to categorize fights into two things, right? There's two categories for all fights fall in, whether help is on the way or help is not on the way. And just because it's not on the way for you doesn't mean it's not on the way for them. So with that in mind, that kind of determines what you're going to be doing within the fight. So this is why I think it's important people start learning all these skills, because if this guy has a buddy coming, it's going to be a good plan for him to keep you pinned, right? Because then he can come and stick something sharp into you, or maybe come put a boot to your head. Now, if let's say now you've come and take this class, and I don't solicit military or law enforcement specifically. I typically focus on the everyman, the every woman as well. And so if you need to keep this guy here for backup, then it's a great plan for you to know how to keep somebody pinned. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
So we start thinking about terms of, so I don't necessarily only think about, hey, you need to do X when Y happens. I think about like, okay, this is the tactical environment. This is the tactical scenario you're in. Now you have to respond to what's going on. And that tactical scenario is going to provide you with what's the best answer for it. Right. So I can't like give everybody any situation, because I don't know who's coming to the class. Right. It's cook bakers and candlestick makers. I can't provide people every single operational context. But what I can do is give people, I know how the human body functions. I know how to move, or I know how to teach people how to move. I know the training methods that can get people there. So that's what we focus on, is the training methods to get people moving right. So that way they can get into fights. And the other thing we do is we add it in layers as well. So that way people don't get overwhelmed. And I make sure that they're able to learn one concept that builds on the next, right? So like a scaffolding effect. So this is essentially the whole course outline. And what my attempt here was to create a linear progression. So I took that from Starting Strength, who I work with, teaching their Live Fight Shoot camp. And basically is like, how do I get somebody from level 0? They don't know how to draw a pistol. They don't know how to do anything there. So my intent is to get somebody from a level 0, not knowing how to fight or shoot, getting them competent in fighting, shooting, and making sure that they can move within all the positions that they may find themselves in, whether they're pinned, whether they find themselves, arm fending, whether they need to push and the gun is out, or they find themselves in a clinch, and making sure that they understand the techniques they can use to access that weapon if need be. Right. So this is the defensive combative class. This is the first course. And so I'm covering people how to use the fence, low, ready, and cover, right? Dealing with the cover, managing the distance, drawing from a fence. So that way they can always maintain distance, right? I mean, pistols are projectile weapons, and they work best in projectile weapon range, right? Mm-hmm. So we make sure we want to maintain that projectile weapon range as best as we can. Then we cover a couple hours of retention shooting. So then we build on that with the pistol knife combatives, where we start talking about arm fending, which is having when the gun is out in your arm hand. Now you need to use your offhand to either push, control, and or maybe use a elbow shield, maybe cover and make shoot from a compressed 3, that sort of nature, as well as fighting in the clinch. And then the ground combatives, I call it ground combatives just as it's totally a marketing term, right? Being truthfully, but I deal a lot with being pinned, and that's going to be with fighting on the wall and fighting on the ground and the training methods associated there. So, and then for integrated combatives, this is where I cover all of those things together and how they're interrelated. So everything is like, if I got the fence, then it's totally easy for me to get my pistol out. If I'm pinned, then that's going to be very challenging. Mm-hmm. The other thing I wanted to illustrate with this is not just the skills that people are missing when they only focus on one skill set, which is typically people like to shoot or people like to fight. So like people who like to fight, they'll deal with being pinned a lot, but they don't know shit about making sure that they keep the fence, or that they're the bad or they're the good guy, that they're mm-hmm. like, mm-hmm. So unless you got $1 million just lying around not doing something, like you want to know how to use appropriate levels of force. So people will be at opposite ends of the spectrum. So this is the things that they're missing, is like making sure you don't go to jail, because if I choke the guy out or make him bleed out, but I go to jail forever, he won, right? So the idea is to go back to living my life peacefully, right? However that takes, and making sure I have the skills to where if I have a failure of awareness, or if I have a failure of managing my distance, my cover, my clinch and pinned, I'm able to get back to where I need to be, where I'm safe. So yeah, that's the intent with illustrating this diagram here.
Right. Luke, we have an article from a few years ago about the non-confrontational stance, which is the fence. Yeah. So it's probably worth dropping in comments, just, giving people a resource of how important that principle is. Right. So essentially, like, John, just explain, briefly what that principle is, what we're talking about with that defense. Again, I referred to it as non-confrontational stance. Some people call it nonviolent posture, etc.
So I call it defense because that comes from Jeff Thompson, a British gentleman, Geoff Thompson, Jeff Thompson. So that was he wrote a book and everything as far as the psychology and dealing with defense. It gives you a defensive barrier. Right? It exactly how it sounds as far as a fence goes. What it does is it serves as a defensive barrier between you and an opponent. Now, the other thing that it does for you is that there's no rule. I know this is kind of a grade school thing where people believe that there's a rule that you got to get hit first before you can hit somebody. Now, if you can articulate what they were doing to make sure that, like, okay, this person, they kept grabbing their waistband, reaching in their pocket, looking around, so based on my training, that means he's trying to target glance, making sure there's no witness around. So I struck him. So the fence is a great stance. So from here, like, I can quickly kind of go into a fight stance, right? So it's very, very adaptive and modular in that sense for defensive purposes. So
right, and of course you can intercept the sucker punch or whatever may come in.